welcome to the show this week. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, I'm delighted that my guest this week is Simon Danczuk, who was indeed the MP for Rochdale for Labour in 2010 through to 2017. And now, indeed, he's with Reform and indeed stood in Rochdale again for Reform, did you not?
I did in the by-election in February last year, that's right.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. You wrote a piece in the Daily Mail this week, which struck me because it was quite an overview of, we're talking about these rape gangs, of course. You started as MP in 2010, but presumably you knew a bit about this before. When did you know first about the gangs? When was the first?
That's a really good question. Prior to 2010, when I became an MP in Rochdale, I'd actually lived in Darwin near Blackburn, which is about 15 miles away from Rochdale. The reason I tell you that is I'd been a councillor in Blackburn when I was 27, so several years before becoming an MP, many years before. And whilst I was a councillor in Blackburn, I heard a rumour around that. I represented a very white area. I wasn't very involved in the local authority, but I heard senior councillors talking about Asian Pakistani taxi drivers picking up young white girls from care homes in Blackburn. And that was several years before the Rochdale grooming scandal, which broke in 2012. So I just heard a smidgen of it from back then. Jack Straw was the MP for Blackburn at the time, if you remember.
Yes.
And he did make that point about Pakistanis, some Pakistani men, seeing these white girls as easy meat.
Easy meat, yeah.
And he was quite strong on the issue, as was Anne Cryer and Keithley. So they were before my time. They'd raised it initially, and I'd heard a little bit about it, but not very much.
Right. I mean, are you, here we are in 2025. Obviously, we know Elon Musk and what Elon Musk has said has blown the whole thing, as it were, internationally. But are you surprised that people are only appreciating quite the extent of it now? Or not surprised?
There's no doubt about it. This is a national criminal justice scandal of the size that we haven't seen in many other years. So I'm not surprised that people are coming back to it and saying, what's gone on? Why has it been covered up? Why did we never take action? That always puzzles me. So I'm an MP. I'm elected in 2010. 2012, this scandal breaks only because these perpetrators are in court, and I get a phone call from journalists wanting a reaction and opinion. I'm relatively new to the subject. All hell breaks loose, really, in terms of the subject. And quite rightly, people start to focus on it. But it always puzzled me that very few parliamentarians would put their head above the parapet and actually speak out on this issue.
Yeah.
We've mentioned Jack, we mentioned Anne Cryer, Sarah Champion spoke out, she was a Rotherham MP, but many others didn't. And some of the reason for that, as I experienced, is that as soon as the scandal broke, I said clearly ethnicity, religion were factors in why these perpetrators attacked and abused these vulnerable white girls. And it's not difficult to realise that. I mean, some of the comments that they made in court, backed that up. But at the same time, I had Labour politicians saying to me, listen, don't mention the ethnicity, don't mention the religion. It'll cost us votes. It won't do you any good. So the examples there are Jim Dobbin, who was the neighbouring MP to me in Heywood and Middleton. Sort of an older statesman within the Labour Party, been around many years, and it's sort of a father figure who giving me advice, and we were at some civic function because his area and mine have coterminous with the local authority area, and he said to me, listen, Simon, you shouldn't mention it, won't do you any good. And that was his advice to me.
Yes.
Then we're approaching Prime Minister's questions just after the scandal broke. Obviously, I was going to raise a question with David Cameron at PMQs, and more concerning, Tony Lloyd sidles up to me beforehand, and he says to me, Simon, I'm going to ask a question on this, on the grooming gangs. because I think it's important. I don't think race is a factor, and I don't think you should mention race. It'll cost us votes. Now, the reason he was asking a question on it, because it wasn't his patch, he was Manchester Central, is because he was showboating, because he was going for Greater Manchester Police Commissioner.
Right.
He was going to stand down as an MP and go for Greater Manchester Police Commissioner. And Greater Manchester has a large ethnic minority vote, and he was concerned that he would lose votes in that process. So he was, and he said it in a debate in Westminster Hall later on that year. So it's on record that he didn't believe race and ethnicity were a factor. I completely disagreed with that, and I carried on saying what I thought had to be said. And indeed, from 2012 till about 2016, I campaigned very heavily on behalf of the victims of child abuse, both relatively recently then, but also historically in relation to Cyril Smith and things. I met Girl A, who prosecuted the case against, she was a key witness. I met her and provided lots of support. Met a father and a family, provided lots of casework support to the family, met a number of the other victims, and campaigned really strongly to try and get some action taken.
When you say that people were saying don't link it to ethnicity or religion, it seems therefore that it was a matter of pure expediency on their part. We don't want to lose Muslim votes.
Yeah, and it will affect multiculturalism. We've built up these communities. Everybody's living relatively harmoniously. And if you start talking about this in a particular way, then relations will break down. I took a counter view, actually. My view was that if I don't, as a Labour MP, if I don't talk about these issues, then the void will get filled by the far right, by the Tommy Robinsons, by the English Defence League. So I think it made sense to be on the side of working people, on the side of the victims, and really call this out and get people in the Pakistani community to call it out instead of trying to brush it under the carpet.
But this is one of the problems is that what people now say, and I think it's very justified, is that there appear to be no voices from that community, even now, sort of more or less saying, we are discussing it not in our name.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'll always recall that when I spoke up and spoke out on this issue back in 2012, a Labour Party activist from the Pakistani community wrote to the local Rochdale Observer newspaper criticising me and effectively said, listen, remember who elected you. We are one of the communities that elected you. If you don't shut up, we won't keep voting for you. That's effectively what the letter said.
Yeah.
And there were people that clearly felt like that. I mean, the Rochdale Council of Mosques were my friends because I'd spoken up on this issue. And they took the view that it should be covered open and that it wasn't a major issue for their community, but it was.
Yes.
Now, in contrast, and I always use Peter Fay, he was the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester. And in 2014, after he'd taken no real action on these issues, in my view, I wrote a piece for the Mail on Sunday. This is back in 2014, saying he should be sacked. Now, by this time, Tony Lloyd is the police commissioner. Yeah. He wasn't having any of it. Yeah. But I'll never forget, in light of the 2012 scandal, Peter Fay came to Rochdale to a public meeting, and the first word he said is, I've come here to celebrate multiculturalism. They're some of the first words that he used to the audience. And many people would have felt, well, it's multiculturalism that's got us in this mess in the first place. So I think he was a total failure on this issue. I used to describe him more as a social worker than a senior police officer, and a bad social worker at that.
Actually, seriously, you mentioned the fellow there who became police commissioner. What was his name again?
Tony Lloyd.
Yeah. Obviously, therefore, his attitude that he expressed to you before he was commissioner must have informed the way he approached being commissioner, surely.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. That was his view. Yeah, no, we had stand-up arguments about it after he'd got the job. He threatened me on the phone and all sorts. It were quite
yes, he said I will hunt you down or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. And I in 2017, just for the record, I wrote to the national inquiry that Professor Jay chaired that looked into a whole range of different kinds of child abuse, not just this type. Setting out quite clearly what both Jim Dobbin and Tony Lloyd had said to me. And Tony was alive at the time. He's passed away subsequently, but he was alive in 2017, very much so. And he would have known what I'd written about it.
Yes.
And recorded this.
Yes.
So, yeah.
You mentioned there about multiculturalism. It seems to me that apart from the expediency, realpolitik of wanting Muslim votes, keeping that narrative of a successful multicultural society in place is one of the dominant motives for what has been a massive cover-up. I mean, I would say. Dennis McShane, who was in Rotherham, wasn't he? I'm not sure when he stopped being MP, the Labour MP, but he later spoke about it, and he said that I think his words were, there was a feeling that we didn't want to rock the multicultural boat. So that was a widespread feeling, presumably.
Yeah. Yes, within the Labour Party and within amongst politicians who represented these areas. And then you've got local politicians as well who would be encouraging that view as well. Local councillors, some Pakistani councillors that would encourage it and leave it to us to sort out and let's keep a lid on it, etc., etc. And that happened in Rochdale. It particularly happened in Rotherham. I sat on the Community Local Government Select Committee and we had an inquiry into Rotherham and what had gone on there. And Professor Jay, before she did the national inquiry, had done a localised inquiry into Rotherham and quite clearly identified that local politicians had played a part in the cover-up.
Yes.
That's her report into the local situation in Rotherham. And I called at the time for Sean Wright, he was the Labour Police Commissioner for South Yorkshire, for him to resign, because before he'd been Police Commissioner, he'd been Cabinet Member in Rotherham and not really called out this type of abuse.
Yes. Nobody has been prosecuted for anything, have they?
No, in terms of the cover-up, certainly not. No, everybody's gone on. I got the Chief Executive, Roger Ellis, called before the Home Affairs Select Committee. He'd clearly failed. He said he knew nothing about it, yet he was the chairman of the Safeguarding Board in Rochdale. I mean, that's just one example. Many officers, council officers, many senior police figures never lost a penny, have gone off into retirement happily. And I think the public want that to be addressed more than anything, as well as the perpetrators, obviously.
You became, MP for Roger in 2010, but as I understand it, like a few years before that, Katie Hopkins came and said a few things about and linked it directly with Pakistani mandatory. And you weren't happy with that at all, where you reported on.
Oh, no, that's a really interesting question, because I get this on social media. As you
do?
Yeah. And so it was whilst I was an MP, and this is my recollection, vague recollection, but I was putting the Pakistan flag up to celebrate Pakistan Independence Day. Now we've put a Ukraine flag up, we've put up lots of different flags in Rochdale, outside the town hall, for lots of different reasons, because it's quite a multicultural, it's quite a diverse community. So we certainly put the Pakistan flag up, and I'm happy to do that. And then she made some remark on social media, linking me, who standing with these Pakistanis, to rape gangs. Well, it was just nonsensical to make the connection. Because obviously not all Pakistani men belong to a rape gang. And she was quite deliberately making some sort of connection there. And it was highly explosive to make that connection. And you've got to remember the context. We had EDL marches and rallies as a consequence of the scandal throughout Rochdale. Yeah. So it was sensitive. And whilst I'm tough on clamping down and challenging people who covered up the rape gangs, I don't think we should lump everybody together in almost a racist way. Yeah. And so she was challenged by the police. The police challenged her on what she put on social media.
I think
justifiably, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think the thing is, when we shouldn't lump people all together. I think one of the problems is that with say like if there's a white paedophile or your Cyril Smith or whoever it might be, when they come out of jail or whatever it might be, they pretty much are shunned. But what appears to be one of the traits in the Pakistani Muslim community is that people actually just go back into that community and they appear to be accepted. They're certainly not shunned. I mean, we've heard cases where, if you're talking about that many people, then surely there were big family networks that must have known that their menfolk were doing it.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about it that there will be people that knew it was happening. But I mean, I think Katie Hopkins is a distraction in all of this. I don't think she helps us get where we need to be in terms of prosecuting the perpetrators or prosecuting or taking action against the people that covered it up. I just don't think her role in it is particularly helpful. And she clearly has an agenda, and I presume she has to make money, and perhaps that's part of it. And I get that. That's fine. But you're exactly right in terms of the community accepting what's gone on and challenging it, and this education that's required in that community to say this is not acceptable and that it should be called out. I completely agree with you. But yeah, again, we can't lump everybody together. There are people in that community that would call it out as well.
You say the education needed. One of the problems, surely, with multiculturalism I put forward is that you can't educate people because that would be to implicitly criticize their culture or make them change their culture. And the whole point of multiculturalism is to celebrate all cultures equally, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And, well, I think we have to have a different approach to it. I don't think multiculturalism's worked. I think people should be integrated much more than they have been. I think we can still do it. I don't think it's too late, but it's more challenging.
How would we do it, do you think?
Well, I think we have to, people have to learn English as an obvious example. I think they have to buy into our cultures. I think we have to accept that it's a Christian country. I think that should be promoted more. This is very much a Christian country, and this idea that, that we have to give people from particular minorities certain protection in some ways.
Protected characteristics.
That's it. I just don't think that works. I think it becomes counterproductive. So we have to really radically change our philosophy in terms of how we approach this.
In the immediate right now, in fact, actually, just before we started recording this, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has made some form of statement, which what it amounts to, without going into all the detail, is that there's no national inquiry that's been announced, right? What's your view? What should happen? Do you think that there should be a national inquiry, and what kind? Or do you think, actually, we've had too many inquiries, we don't need another one?
Well, I think what she's now proposing are localised inquiries, and I don't think they work at all. They can't compel people to come and give evidence. They have limited resources, even if they put a bit of money into it. And it's local areas marking their own homework. You wouldn't rely on some of these local authorities to really reach strong conclusions in terms of senior officers and stuff. So I just don't think localised inquiries work at all. I think we need a national inquiry. It doesn't have to go like what other inquiries have gone before. So Starmer says, it'll take 3 or 4 years. It doesn't have to. No, it doesn't have to. It's nonsense. And you can be prosecuting perpetrators at the same time. You can be doing more than one thing at once.
Yes.
Most people can, perhaps not Keir Starmer. But so it doesn't have to be like what he describes. That's a red herring. The other inquiry that Professor Jay has already done was a very broad brush, looked at a whole range of different kind of abuse of children, quite rightly, and reached some strong conclusions and recommendations which should be implemented, like the mandatory reporting. This inquiry can be much smarter, sharper, shorter, to the point, and result in making recommendations for action to be taken, not just against the perpetrators, but that's being done anyway. It should be being done by the police. But by those that covered it up. That's what the public are most angry about in all of this, is those people who covered it up and the fact that they haven't answered for it. And that's what the inquiry should do.
Also, inquiries can subpoena people, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it would have to have that power.
Yes.
And you could have the whole thing done in 6 or 9 months, couldn't you?
Yes, absolutely. With the right chairperson, with the right direction, the right terms of reference. And I wouldn't rely on the Home Secretary or Keir Starmer to draw up the terms of reference. It'd have to be more independent.
Yes.
People have had enough of this.
Yes.
And politics is in a very different place to what it was even just 5, 6, 10 years ago. when the national inquiry was set up. People want action. They're determined to get action, and things have changed radically. So I think they want a smart, more efficient inquiry.
Yeah. I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, you're in Reform now. I believe Reform have announced that they would do one, haven't they?
They've talked about, you're right, they've talked about fundraising and doing it independently. How effective that will be, I'm not sure.
I
They
think
won't have the
probably
power.
not. Yeah, I think probably not. I think it needs to come directly from the good government, as it were.
The power.
Yeah. I was going to say quite a journey from Labour to Reform, but actually not really necessarily. I mean, I was in UKIP for a long time, and there were a lot of, there was more of a natural journey for many people from Labour or left into things like Brexit and UKIP and what have you. Why did you go to Reform?
Well, a number of reasons, really. I would always have put myself on the traditional right wing within the Labour Party.
Yeah.
So tough on immigration, tough on benefit claimants who are not getting into work, tough on law and order. So I was always on that wing of the party. And Labour, I came into the parliamentary Labour Party at the wrong time. I come in 2010, we end up with Ed Miliband. If that's not bad enough, and it's bad, we then have Jeremy Corbyn for a couple of terms, and then it comes out the other side with Keir Starmer. So I left the party in 2017. I mean, it wasn't my kind of Labour Party. So on any of those types of issues, I mean, look at it, and I feel more strongly now than ever. Illegal immigration, people coming over in boats, absolutely outrageous. I feel very strongly about that. But the multiculturalism issue, policing and disorder, we talk about London, and I live mainly in London now. I mean, it feels unsafe, more unsafe than it did 10 years ago. So on a whole range of issues, I think Reform are calling it out, calling it right. And the two main parties, I mean, the Conservatives have done some stuff right, but they're nowhere near in the right place. This uni-party, as people talk about, they're both fighting over the centre ground. And I don't think that's even where the public are at, never mind me.
You mentioned that you're living in London. Like, how long have you been living here now?
10 years.
10 years now. Just actually to go back to the rape gangs, this question's been asked, and I remember I brought it up when I was in the Assembly, actually. London appears not to figure. 50 towns we have, 50 towns and cities so far. I'm sure there'll be more where this has gone on. Some pretty leafy places, too, like Oxford. Yeah. Actually, some of the worst abuse was in Oxford. London appears not to have had it. Why would you think that would be?
I think that's a really interesting question, which I've had conversations about over the last few weeks, actually, and I don't have any definitive answer. I think the ethnic makeup is much more complex. So if you take Tower Hamlets, very Bangladeshi, very high number of Bangladeshis, that particular group tend not to get involved in this type of abuse. There aren't lots of Bangladeshi people with that background involved in this at all. Yeah. Quite the contrary. So it's a particular strain of people, Pakistanis who have perhaps a more strong religious belief, Islamic belief than some others from that religion. And so the ethnicity is very different, and the makeup of towns and boroughs around London is radically different to those closed communities that you get in Rotherham, that you get in Rochdale. Pakistani communities within 1 or 2 square miles, living in terraced housing, keeping themselves to themselves, operating in this twilight economy, evening economy, just feeling able to do what they've done, and just radically different from the more cosmopolitan London that we see.
Yes, I can see that. I suppose it's entirely without data, it was my hunch, was that basically there is no white working class left in London in an odd way, because in many of it, like Rochdale places, you've got the kind of residual structure, haven't you, there from before when there were large industrial towns. But in London, I can't think of an area actually. I mean, you mentioned the East End. I mean, white working class long ago left the East End, but it's pretty much the case for all of London.
Yeah, and actually the geography of it, I think, is really important. And if you go back to what I was talking about, you've got Rochdale and then Harewood and Middleton, these two constituencies, me and Jim Dobbin, and they're coterminous with Rochdale Borough. And the Pakistan, this is going back 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
The Pakistani community very much in Rochdale, not in Harewood and Middleton. So what you had there is the perpetrators coming from my constituency and the victims predominantly living in Harewood and Middleton on poor white working class council estates. Some of these perpetrators working in takeaways, taxis, they don't know the boundaries of constituencies or anything else.
Yeah.
Operating in and around Harewood and Middleton and abusing some of Jim Dobbin's constituents. And ironically, he did very little. He used to coast along as an MP, not doing very much. And I ended up having, which I shouldn't have done, helping the victims, doing the casework for his victims, because he wasn't doing it. But I mean, that's another story in itself. Yes. But that's the geography of these things. It's really important.
It's important. Whatever the geography might be, is one thing. I think you pointed it out. Is certainly something which I think is an enormous part of it. Is the sheer snobbery involved in the attitudes to these girls that went right across and still does the establishment.
Yeah.
That basically they're not worth it. I mean, did you recognise that whilst you were an MP and like now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about race and religion being a factor, multiculturalism, and not wanting to rock the multiculturalism boat, but also people across communities, the white community, the middle class, and in professional services, public services, taking a derogatory view of the girls,
yes,
and that they were making lifestyle choices or they were prostitutes. I mean, we all know that children can't be prostitutes, but nevertheless, then we're going back 15 years. They were seen as prostitutes, and they were, they were going along with it. So they had a very poor view. But I made the point. So the grooming scandal broke, the Rochdale rape gang scandal broke in May 2012. There was a debate in Parliament in November 2012, and I make about child abuse. Anne Coffey had initiated it, this Stockport MP. And I split the speech in two parts. The first half was about the Rochdale rape gangs and the young girls. And then the second half, I outed Cyril Smith, who'd been the MP for Rochdale from 1972 to 1992, and talked about how he was a paedophile, he'd abused young boys. And I made the point that the girls got abused because they were poor white working class girls ignored, and his victims, Smith's victims, got ignored because they were poor white working class boys. And so from he was abusing from the 50s onwards. And these victims were just ignored because they were from broken families, as we call them, one-parent families. And he was very careful. His modus operandi were to pick on particular boys to abuse that were from broken homes, etc. And they were just ignored. They weren't believed. And fast forward, the idea that this goes away and stops happening is just not the case, as we've seen there.
Yeah. Finally, actually, it's related to this point. One thing that's become quite clear over the past few weeks, when I say clear, I mean in a popular way, the public are aware, was the sheer racial element in this, that, we've seen the transcripts now and comments made by some of the perpetrators, about the white girls being this less than kind of scum in the street, the superiority of being a Muslim, all of this. So in other words, it was probably the biggest racially aggravated crime that we've seen in this country.
Yes, absolutely. And there's the irony, isn't it? That this multiculturalism agenda says we shouldn't raise it or challenge it because of multiculturalism. And yet the perpetrators are the most racist of all, aren't they? The people committing these crimes are being exceptionally racist against these poor white girls, and yet we don't call that out, or that's that's covered up. I mean, it's appalling. I struggle to. You talk about the statements. I struggle to read them nowadays. Actually,
yes, I think sort of it's one of those things, isn't it? If they could be made public. I think it's very expensive, but I mean, they are in the public arena. It costs a lot of money to get them. But, they are so upsetting. But I think people have got to see and read quite what these girls went through.
Absolutely.
What's the future for you with reform? Are you standing again in an election when it comes, or what?
I haven't reached any conclusions on that, and the leadership of the party would make a decision on that, as I would with my wife. I stood in the Rochdale by-election. We got death threats and all sorts of a serious nature, which are being prosecuted, hopefully, by the police. That was quite surprising to my wife. She didn't like the whole of that. So we have a decision to make, but it's possible. I don't rule it out. I don't rule it in.
Yeah. Well, look. Can you stay with us, actually, because we're going to ask you a few questions for our members. But in the meantime, thanks very much for joining me today. Thank you very much, Simon Danczuk. We shall see you next week. Have a good week in the meantime, won't you? Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.